Okay, we're going to transition now to the important role that ventilation plays in preventing emergencies. We have a video clip to play for that now as well.
We had a ventilation problem at one of the coal mines I worked at probably about, I'm thinking 18 years ago. A good friend of mine named Tim. He was working in an upper unit section of the mine. I was working in a lower section of the mine. I was one of the EMTs at the mine site. They couldn't find Tim. Two of the guys from the crew up above came down and got me in the lower section. We came up the upper section. We went down the entry that they last saw Tim in. We got to within about 30 feet of his feet. We could see that he was laying face down in the mine floor in the mud. At that point, the gentleman that was with me, Darlene, he started saying he started to get a headache. He didn't really feel real well, queasy, blurriness of vision. I realized at that point we were at a low oxygen situation. We were the lucky ones. We got out. Tim didn't. You really have to keep an eye on your ventilation. If you don't know, ask. A lot of the guys work 5, 6, 7 years in the mines. They can ventilate up the face just fine. They do not know what goes on out by. We need to learn that to make sure our ventilation's right, to keep our miners safe, and make sure everybody goes home every night.
Tim, a question. From a large longwall mine perspective, what are the critical tasks to maintain an effective ventilation system, especially when both the CM units and the longwall units are moving fairly frequently?
Well, it boils down to, of course, we know we have to have intakes to get the air started up through the mine, but it really boils down to the maintenance of the existing ventilation controls. It's a very touchy situation, especially when you start a new longwall panel and you're finishing up or you're 3/4 through a development panel, because you've set yourself so far back in. We need to maintain all of our, just the little things. For instance, a door. Every time you look, maybe you'll see a door in the middle. Cumberland, you won't see that at that particular mine. You'll see it on the left or right. Due to bottom hoove, what's that do? That cracks that door. You're starting to lose a little bit of air. If that happens up through a panel 13,000 feet, then you've lost a sizable amount. Working together, people don't realize that heavy, big supplies coming in, and we'll use the bulk dust, rock dust, big dusters come in. They can work as a mini, if I could say, a half a stopping, or it cuts that airflow down. We have to be very vigilant on what we do when we do rock dust. I mean, we're doing a job to whiten up the mine to make it safe, but we also have to watch our ventilation when we're doing it. The longwall startups, we usually take, and we need to communicate this through the whole mine, that we'll be down until we make that major change to start setting it up so we can still mine our mains and mine our 2 gate roads plus start up a longwall. But it goes back to keeping our headings at the heights we need, mining them at heights anticipating any bottom hooving or any settling to where you take your area down in the long run. And again, keeping up with future, let's say, bleeder shafts for our longwalls and our intake shafts to keep them on line so we're not waiting for air, to say.
Quite a bit to look out for.
Absolutely.
Tom, what are the greatest challenges in the small mine setting for maintaining your effective ventilation?
There's a lot of things that being a little different from the larger mines is that they deal with methane gas a lot. In my area, we don't have a lot of methane gas. So it's a challenge. You train the guys annually, and they get qualified to take methane and oxygen checks as required by the law. But a lot of times you have to remain on them to make sure they make diligent gas checks, because they've never had, they always say, well, we've never had gas in our mines. So what's the point of doing a good gas check? We know we don't have it. We know we don't have it. But you still have to train them to do the proper gas checks and good gas checks all the time, because conditions change so frequently. You know, it could happen tomorrow. You never had methane before, and tomorrow you hit a pocket of methane. And so that's one of the first steps in preventing disasters. Make sure you make good checks. And even if you never had that condition before, you still have to continue to look for it, because it could happen tomorrow. And another thing we have, another one of the challenges we have is out by ventilation, being that we don't use belt air at the face like some of the big longwall mines. We run our air up our belt lines, and then we have to dump it all into the return before it goes on the section. The air is not allowed to go on a section. So we have to make good checks to make sure our air is going the proper direction with the proper velocities, so that, and it's all not entering the section at the feeder. That's another thing. So, and another thing is pre-shift checks and on-shift checks. You know, guys go through the routine every day of making good checks. They make sure they have the proper requirements, but not only are we looking for the proper requirements, we want to make sure, check the records before we go in, because if there's any major changes in the amount of air that you have or ventilation, that might be a tip-off that you have problems elsewhere to start looking further.
Rick, I'm sure that MSHA has a number of good resources that can be tapped for helping operators maintain more effective ventilation, including in complex situations like when you have large bleeder areas and massive sealed areas.
Well, we have a new law that we put in on, which Tom talked about a little bit, was for pre-shift, on-shift, and our weekly exams. The main focus of those needs to be ventilation. And with the new laws coming in, if we have a problem with ventilation, we need to address it at the time we're doing our pre-shift. Pre-shift, you're in there 3 hours before the next shift comes in, make sure that everything's safe. Our on-shift, you're checking everything at the section, and you're also checking the fan sprays on the miner, the scrubber on the miner, or the sprays on the shear. Those are all during the on-shift check. Then you have your weekly check, checking your out-by areas to make sure that your stoppings and your overcasts and undercasts, if you're using them, are all intact. You have to make sure all of these are being taken care of by certified people that are properly trained. I was a mine examiner for many years, and I've been underground helping coal companies with their pre-shift and their on-shift people. I actually, at EPD, we give a class on that, and we try to help out the best we can. Now that the new laws are into place, you know, we have a part of MSHA that's out there to help people also. You know, the one thing for MSHA is we want to make sure that everybody goes home in the evening. And training is a big deal with MSHA. And with the human factor always involved, we have to keep striving and striving and striving to make sure our training is done properly.
Okay, good, thank you. Jeff, from your experience and maybe others in BMS, what seem to be the most common problems with ventilation that you run into?
Pennsylvania is a unique state. Once again, as our panel was here, we have the large longwall operations. We have the smaller room and pillar operations where sometimes they have 3 or 4 sections, or they just have the one section. And some of the mines don't even drive an overcast if they don't need to. We also have the problem of our large underground limestone mines, which is completely different ventilation. And also in the eastern part of the state, there's the anthracite, which has different. So what that means is it's people. The Bureau has an extensive training program for our people that before you even come on board with the Bureau as a mine inspector or as an instructor, you must have a lot of experience in the field you're entering. And so with our engineering staff, with our mine inspectors, the mine inspector supervisors, division chiefs, along with the training that is required by every certified official in the state of Pennsylvania, from mine examiner, assistant foreman, mine foreman, electrician, there's always a set of eyes, there's always an option for these people to get the answers or what they need to improve their ventilations, once again, to be that proactive mode. So once again, that we do not repeat the 1980s of the rescue trucks being called out every 6 months or so.
Frequently, we need to make some changes to our methane our ventilation and methane and dust control plans. So I'm wondering how How frequently do those generally change? And then when changes are made, how do you communicate that to the workforce so they're on top of that the very next shift?
Probably the most frequently thing changed in our plan, our ventilation plans, is the respirable dust parameters that directly affect, the men on the section. And hopefully it never happens. It usually happens when we get a dust citation, so we hope that it never does. And we've been fortunate since I've been there, probably maybe once a year, we might have a time where we go over the dust standard and we have to revise it, but we make sure as soon as any change we make sure the mine can do it before we make the change in the plan. And then we make sure we train all the crews and the supervisors in individual groups before they go underground. Then we go underground and review it with them before they start it, make sure they know what checks are changing and they know the proper parameters to use before they begin mining.
Now, I would say dust parameters, it's a very, that could be probably the front runner there. Again, to train the miners, depending on the depth of the training, we may hold them outside for an hour, or we may put it in a safety message to them outside, then it's reviewed again on the section. And then, of course, when we do, let's just say, a 8-hour refresher, that will be a big part, again, to bring it into play, depending on where it happens within that calendar year. And we always leave time to communicate anything like that, any changes, whether it be ventilation, dust, or methane, to the miners through our emergency response quarterly.